Welcome to, I think, the third parent briefing of the morning. Well, it's almost lunchtime now. And this one is looking at senior school transition, how to prepare for the intense competition at 11+. So before I introduce our panel who are answering this question, I thought it might be quite helpful just for you to tell us a little bit about yourselves. So could you put your hand up if you have a child who is preparing at the moment for 11+? Okay, yep, about half the room. Put your hand up if you have a child who will at some point be preparing for the 11+. Another half of the room. Okay, put your hand up if you are in any way slightly anxious about your child's performance in the 11+. Great. Okay, that's pretty much the same as when we did the talk yesterday. So it's a feature of London education and independent schools that children have to do these tests. And what we're going to do today is talk a bit about how you understand, or how you might come to an understanding about how your child might perform in these tests, and what you do with that understanding when you get there. Because actually, part of choosing a school is working out whether your child would pass the test to get in, and then also whether they'll flourish when they get there. So you do have to have some understanding of your child's academic profile. So to answer these questions, I'm really delighted to welcome Sarah Warley, who's founder of the Key Clinic, and she'll talk a bit more about what that is in a moment, and Desmond O'Connor, educational psychologist at Bonas MacFarlane and at O'Connor Assessments. Both of them know an enormous amount about how you assess and then act on what you find out from assessments. But before we get into that bit of it, let's just talk a little bit about what you know about London schools. How fast-paced are London academic schools, and what could you say about who the kinds of children that education suits and who it doesn't suit?
I think that's a really great question to begin with, because when you get involved in playground dialogue or school gate dialogue about schools, suddenly there's a hierarchy emerges, and we're all there thinking, my goodness, my child should be going to St. Paul's or Wimbledon or any of the schools that sort of crop up regularly. What's really important to understand about the school that you're choosing for your child is whether or not the school is a good fit for them, rather than them necessarily being a good fit for the school. There's a little bit of square peg round holes shoving our children down a certain path, instead of thinking, where does my child really excel? How do they flourish? What makes them shine?
We're on to the next question, though, Des. Let's just focus on just those schools. How academic are they? How elite are they? Those big name ones that you mentioned, you know, let's take a St. Paul's or a Westminster or an Eton or those kinds of schools. How difficult are they?
They're difficult. They're difficult to get into. They are, you know, they've got sort of very exacting criteria. And the bit that always upsets me is that they are testing children at younger and younger and younger ages when they might not be neurodevelopmentally ready or in their stride yet to be able to perform as well as they can.
Yeah, so we just have to be realistic. So, for example, this afternoon, St. Paul's Girls is in London Choices and talking on the Bursary Pavilion. That is an extremely difficult school for a child to get into. So one of the things that you might be trying to work out, sat here today, is your child suited to that kind of school? Can we sort of drill into that a little bit? Apart from the fact that it's difficult, what kind of children do those sort of schools suit?
I think in my experiences, those kind of schools are very well suited to children who are already good at coping with pressure. They're already good at coping with tests. They're maybe already kind of streets ahead of their peers in terms of their learning and their developmental age. That's not to say that that's going to sustain over time, because very often some of the clients that we work with are really ready to bloom and ready to blossom, but they're not ready to be pushed at the age of 8 or 9 or 10 to get into a school that they're not really ready to thrive in. So that's very important to understand.
And I just want to add that, to me, I think the most important thing is for a child to feel confident. So, you know, scraping them into a school where everyone there is going to be super competitive isn't necessarily going to be the best outcome for success. You want them to feel good about themselves and the environment they're in. And all I know is if a child is happy, they're going to do well, regardless of where the school sits on the league tables. It's not just a question of get them in the good league table school and they'll thrive. You know, I've got personally my own children, 2 of the girls that went to school that really was not that competitive. They chose to do that for the environment, and they did exceptionally well.
I think you picked up, sorry, just to leap on a word, that word competitive. Some schools are very competitive, and it doesn't mean that they're better for your child. They're better for a competitive child who really flourishes in that environment, but for a child who needs a little more space and room and time to grow, that's going to be the best school in which they'll flourish.
And one of the great things about the show is that you've literally got every kind of school in it, for all abilities and all academic capabilities. And temperaments. So whether your child likes exams and tests and flourishes in that kind of environment or doesn't. I mean, there will be a huge range of schools, but we're actually focused on the 11 plus and the tests and the assessments, which means that we're kind of talking about, you know, schools that have some rigor about the entry process. That's why everyone's sat here, because they're worried about that. They're not worried about getting them into the school that doesn't care about the 11 plus test results. So the first question we're going to ask then, to get real about this process, is, you know, first of all, put your hand up if your child's in a primary school rather than a prep school. So who's in a state primary school at the moment? Okay, quite a large proportion. And the rest of you, put your hand up if your child's in a prep school. Okay, that's so roughly 50-50, maybe 2/3, third. So the first question to ask then is, how should you interpret your child's school reports? What information will that give you about the kinds of schools you ought to be looking at later on?
I think the school report is very much a movable feast, and I've seen in my experience as a teacher prior to becoming an assessor and psychologist, different schools approach the school report in a different way. You can have teachers who are very keen to tell the best possible and most positive picture at the end of a year. You can have teachers who really want to bring certain challenges or dilemmas to your attention, and therefore the report becomes skewed. I never think the school report is as objective a document as we sometimes believe it to be, and it's more important to have that regular ongoing dialogue with the teacher, to be paying good attention to scores, but also good attention to your child's temperament around their learning. I think that very often a school report, you need to read between the lines, beneath the surface.
I think that's exactly right. And you know, the bit that we specialise in doing is trying to have a look at whether that child is performing to the best of their ability, because we get loads of children that come to us that are underperforming relative to how intelligent they actually are. And so that's, of course, what the school report's going to reflect. But if they've got underlying, you know, neurodevelopmental blockages, barriers, if they're hearing auditory information in a certain way, perhaps they've got a biochemical imbalance that's going to make it hard for them to sit still and concentrate, that school report is not going to be a fair assessment of how intelligent that child actually is. They're underperforming relative to what they could be doing.
I think that the school report is very often a reflection of a child's relationship with their teacher or teachers as well, which is not, again, necessarily the kind of objective data that we're looking for in terms of where is our child going to be best placed at secondary school. So this is where a sort of independent assessment is sometimes just a lot more useful. Yeah.
Though primary school reports have quite a lot of metrics on them these days. So it isn't just kind of like, oh, so-and-so had a really good term and worked terribly hard. You do get quite a lot of data. And actually, what you do with that data is quite interesting as well, and something we could delve into perhaps later. Obviously, the other kind of way you get information from school usually is a parents' evening. So you do need to make sure you go to those and have interesting conversations about what the teachers think about how your child's performing. They will eventually probably tell you things about whether they're sitting still, for example, which are quite useful things to know. But bear in mind that most teachers don't like to upset parents and will need coaxing and be reassured that you're willing to hear complicated information.
I think the long and the short of it, what we're finding here is that the school report is an appraisal of a relationship that's emerged over the course of a year. A parents' evening is a 5, 10, 15-minute conversation in which we're not likely to delve in the kind of depth into the kind of topics that are going to be of interest to you as parents. All of which suggests that if you have the opportunity to sit with someone for a significantly longer period of time and talk to them about your child in relation to your child, not your child in relation to their peer group, that's really what Sarah and I are doing in terms of our assessment work.
Yeah, so basically what we're here doing is setting up the basic information problem that most parents have, which is that you get these school reports, and particularly if you're in the primary school system, the primary school report doesn't tell you anything at all about 11 plus independent school entry and how your child might get in or not get, how well they might do, and the teacher, when you go and talk to them, probably hasn't prepared anyone for the school that your child's going to, and will also not be able to tell you how well they're likely to do. So there's an information problem. And you're trying to work out what preparation they should do and how you can help, and whether they should even try and apply for that school. So what do you do? Well, one of the things that you could do is get your child assessed. So perhaps let's start with who should be thinking about getting their children assessed? Because historically, people only did this if they thought there was a learning difficulty.
I think we're thankfully beginning to put that notion behind us, and certainly more and more with the work I do with Bonas MacFarlane, there's a spirit of every child should be assessed, because we've touched on this already, that when you get your data that's in the child's school report or your exam data at the end of the year, that's all essentially information that relates your child to their peer group and doesn't tell you about your child in relation to themselves and in relation to their goals and their aims. So it's really useful to have completely objective, standardized testing that doesn't relate to the way your child is coping in terms of a nationalized curriculum, but talks about how your child is able to perform not only academically or psychologically, but also emotionally when they're placed under test conditions, working with someone in an unfamiliar environment. The fact that these assessments happen one-to-one makes them really significantly, substantially different to a whole class assessment in whatever kind of school your child's at, because we're looking in much greater detail, much more personalized detail at exactly how your child performs, where they excel, and where they might need a little bit of extra support.
And I think the work that we're doing is kind of picking up from that. So, Des will be able to identify there's this area where perhaps things aren't functioning as well as they could do. So the work that we do is really looking at the biology, the neurophysiology that's going on that might be getting in the way of your child, as I said, being able to really achieve their full potential. So we carry out assessments. And again, we genuinely recommend that everyone should have an assessment at least at one point in their school career, just to check and see, are there any what we call neurodevelopmental delays or immaturity? So an example of that are these little primitive reflexes. I don't know if any of you have heard of those, but these are things that all babies have in the first year of life. They all serve an important purpose to help create the wiring in the brain for most of what we do to happen on a kind of autopilot. They should have gone by the time a baby reaches their first birthday. But we know that when you find someone who is underperforming, not firing on all cylinders, when we test, we find they've got these little immaturities still there, these baby reflexes, and they mess up everything. They mess up eye tracking, balance, coordination, your ability to sit still and focus. So that checking for that is really important. And also auditory, and it's not just a question of can my child hear or not? Is there hearing loss? The question is, how are they hearing language and information? Because you're all going to be paying a fortune for education. There'll be a lot coming at you. Can they actually process that information well? Have they got dislateral hearing? Are they jumping from one ear to the other? Have they got hypersensitive hearing? Can they not?
Okay, I'm going to,
Okay,
because
anyway,
there's a huge long list of things you might have. But,
we're looking at it biologically.
but, so half the room here has a child currently preparing for 11 plus, and the other half have got much younger children. So what age should you start assessing?
It's a very interesting question, and I know certainly from a psychological perspective we can assess children from the age of 3. From an academic perspective we can assess children from the age of 5. There's a bigger question, do we need to be assessing children? It comes down to your child. And it comes down to your instinct, because this is about, the children we're working with we're answering a question about whether or not this child is really doing as well as we believe them to be capable of doing. Are they really getting the most from life and the most from their learning? So for certain children, we feel that maybe they're standing out from their peer group at the age of 3 or 4 or 5, and therefore it makes sense to sit them down with someone who really understands where they should be developmentally at that age. For most people in the room, it's probably going to become more useful or more necessary between the age of 6 and 9 or 10, where we sort of really wanted to think about next steps.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the important bit I didn't say is that you can correct all of those things. You can do neurodevelopmental exercises, you can carry out a course of auditory processing to tune things up. Or if you've got a child who's very hyper and can't concentrate, we can do, without medication, we can do very targeted nutrient therapy to rebalance the neurotransmitters in the brain. So there's a ton you can do ahead of time to get your child firing on all cylinders and make sure they're accessing it. Around 7, I would say about 7 years of age is a really good age to come in, certainly to do a neurodevelopmental assessment, but we work with all ages.
They've had time to step into their own, and they've also got time before they need to step into another.
So this is all very good. This is if you're the kind of well-prepared parent who's kind of done everything at the right moment. Suppose you're not like that, you're like me, and you're thinking, oh my God, they're taking their test in 3 weeks' time, or 6 months' time, or a year's time. Is that too late?
I think it's never too late, but I think there are things that we need to understand about the way in which we can prepare our children for success. There can be a real instinct or a real urge to cram or to push. I don't like the word push. In fact, I delete it from all my conversations with parents, because I think that when we've got, the panic stations assessment, we've got 3 weeks to go, maybe 4 weeks to go if you're particularly well prepared. And so at that kind of stage, we're looking at your child's emotional state, their readiness to give of themselves in an assessment. So we're not going to be able to fill many gaps in the curriculum by then, but at that point it becomes especially useful to say, well, where does your child really flourish? Where are their strengths? Let's do a few sessions of mentoring, or let's do a few sessions of real empowerment so that their self-concept is supercharged before they go into their assessment. So at least they can make the best of what they've got, even if they've got quite a few gaps that need to be filled.
Can I add one thing to that? Exam technique. It's not just knowledge. I mean, there are ways of doing these things. There, understanding what scores get associated with what thing, and just teaching them those little tricks as well can help a lot, can't it?
I think also I would say as a parent, it's managing your own expectations is terribly important. And if you can get if you can get a lid on your own expectations, that will really help your child perform. And so more information helps with that. The more you know, the more likely you're going to be helpful rather than hinder your child. And actually, to be awfully honest, a lot of the time parents do hinder their children's performance as much as help.
I think,
Speaking for myself, anyway.
Just to pick up on that, and to talk again, we talked about these school gate conversations and these playground conversations and the hierarchy of schools and where we feel our children should be applying. Don't forget that if you kind of do the right amount of assessment and really get to know your child so that you're making the right choice for them in terms of future schools, then you'll realize it's not a question of how you look in front of the other parents, but how you look in front of your child when in 10 years' time they know that you made a really great choice on their behalf.
There's a hand up at the back, so I'm going to let the questions be interrupted. So could we pass the microphone over to... can you put your hand up again so that the microphone can reach you?
I think the womble's traumatizing a baby down there, by the way.
Yeah, try not to get distracted by the womble. It's very exciting.
Is it on? Okay. Hi there. Hi. If one has recognized that one's child is neurodivergent, or maybe has slightly slower processing, or is academically strong but might just need that extra little bit of attention or a slightly different environment, but not a special needs school, that they can flourish in the right kind of mainstream environment, what should a parent be looking for?
Okay, that's a really, really interesting question. I mean, there's two sides to that question. One is what can you do, and then also what information, what should you be, what kind of schools should you be looking for, and what information do you give to schools?
Can I ask a quick question? What sort of neurodiverse are we talking?
Anything slow processing.
Okay, slow processing is the thing we're always told. Or on the spectrum. Okay, so two different things. If you're talking on the spectrum, we will be looking to gut functioning. We will be looking to see if there's hypersensitive hearing. Those tend to be sort of common traits. But slow processing, all that really means is that your brain is having to jump through a load more hoops before getting to actually answer the question that it was asked. And that often is a direct result of neurodevelopmental delay. As I said, these little reflexes trip the system up. They create blockages. And they just mean that you have to work 10 times as hard. You have to jump through more hoops to get to the same place. And that wastes vital grey matter trying to do all of that compensating. So actually, carrying out work to target those blockages and get rid of them. And the joy about the work is you only have to do it once. You find out where the blockages might be in the system. You target, you get rid of it through slow controlled neurodevelopmental exercises or auditory or whatever's required. And then the system's functioning as it should be. And then for the rest of their lives, they're going to be functioning as well as they possibly can.
And I think to speak to the question of future schools and making the right choice of future schools, so you have a child that might be neurodiverse, but they are still able to function or to thrive within a mainstream school. When you go to that school, very many schools will say we have a great additional needs department, we have an open door policy to neurodiverse population. Go to the school, find out if you can talk to the SENCO, find out if you can visit the additional needs department. Does it look good? Is it in the heart of the school? Does it look like a place where exciting learning happens?
I'm going to really trim it down there. Yep. Just to flag up also, at 1:15, there is a talk over there, literally over there, on precisely this topic. So if you're in that position, SEN and how and when to decide the route that will suit your child, that's the place to have a more detailed discussion. But an interesting thing that we started talking about before the panel began is that if you have an assessment, you don't have to share it with the school, but you might want to.
Yeah, this is a really important point, and I'm going to pick up on that immediately. You don't have to, but you might want to. Let's just hold that thought for a second. If you have a private assessment, either by someone like myself or someone like Sarah, this is something that you have commissioned to find out more about your child. It hasn't been ordered or arranged by the NHS or by CAMS. It hasn't been ordered or arranged by your school, so the report is for you to do with as you will. Now, I would also say it really benefits your child to have open lines of communication with their school. I'm not saying have these reports done and keep them secret, but I'm saying don't feel weighed down by the thought that if I suddenly discover my child is dyslexic or they might have an autistic spectrum condition, am I ruling them out of future schools? No, you're informing your choice of the best future school by really making sure you can choose a school that caters to your child's needs, and then make the decision whether or not you share that report with the school. If you do, you'll get better quality provision, you'll get better value for your money in the education you're paying for right now, but it is your choice. You don't need to share that information, you don't need to share that report.
But bear in mind that I don't think there's a single highly academic London school that doesn't cater for dyslexics, for example. The days when schools treated that sort of thing as not part of what their school was about are gone.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, another really important thing with an educational psychologist report such as that Des would do, you get that critical extra time in exams, okay? So it's important for that. And we've worked with a lot of children who've had an ed psych report, have got extra time in exams. We then target and try and sort out the underlying causes of that problem. And we say, now go back and get another report. And they don't want to do it because they don't want to give up the extra time that they worked hard to get, So that's just another factor.
So we've got time for a couple more questions. So, yep, at the front. Let's get the microphone down.
Just a quantitative question here. Is there any quantitative data on the role of tutoring, whether the quantitative improvements and ideal length of duration and so on?
That's for him to answer that one, isn't it?
Well, actually, my job title is I'm head of research at Bonas, so I can point you towards some data on that if you're interested. And yes, it works. Is the basic answer. Yeah. The studies are like a lot of things in education. Education research is all a bit flaky, even at the DFE level, and I wouldn't say that there's clear evidence that you could point out and say this amount will do X, but yeah, tutoring works. Yeah. That's why people do it.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and I have very clear intrapersonal evidence, because obviously I work doing academic assessment for Bonas MacFarlane, so very many of my clients, I assess them 1 year, I assess them the following year or 2 years later, and it works.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, all the neurodevelopmental work and things that we're doing, 40 years of research evidence clinically showing it works. It allows children's English grades, maths grades, whatever, to improve if there is a block there to begin. Obviously we're not going to make anyone more intelligent than they are, but we're going to help them access it.
Can I just ask, how reliable and robust and reproducible are the assessments that you're doing? If it is the case that you're just meeting the child on a one-off or maybe a couple occasions, why do you think that that's better than the assessment that's being made by a school? Obviously, you're taking out biases and
that's such a good
interpersonal
question.
relationships and so on, but why do you think this is better? How is it more valuable?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. Firstly, in terms of the way that I work, I know that a lot of psychologists will only see a child for an afternoon. I very rarely do that. I would always want to see them ideally in a home setting, a school setting, and over 2 or 3 assessment days. The tests that we use, things like the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test and the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children, you know, they're globally recognized as giving really good objective data, and it's because you're looking in such detail at the child as an individual and their response to novel situations. So in terms of their intellectual functioning or intellectual potential, you're really looking at them in much greater individual detail than is possible if they're carrying out a generalized test in school, is what I would say.
And I'd say, you know, the work that we're doing, I mean, they're sort of medical tests, you know, so we are directly physically testing if there is a retained reflex, if the eyes are able to track or converge, do what they need to do. We carry out hearing tests or lab tests, blood tests, urine tests. So we know with great accuracy either something's there or it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I have a son. I could talk about him all day, like as we all can about our children, who has absolutely failed to come up to register anything in any tests, but can't perform in maths at all. And he's been tested to within an inch of his life. So you know, sometimes the school information just tells you something clear that other things don't show up. And yeah, that's some clear information. What you then do about it is a really interesting question, which I'm still puzzling.
But that's the important point. Most of these things don't have to be a life sentence. You can totally change the future trajectory. So I would also argue, don't undershoot relative to what you think your child is capable of, because they might have a load of stuff going on at the moment that's really interfering with their ability to perform well. And what you don't want is, in a year's time, having sort of done some work with us, everything improves, and you think, oh, maybe I should have applied there. That can happen as well.
The other straightforward thing, which is really, you know, the one, if there's a problem with assessments, and I don't expect the panel to flag this up, but if there is a problem with it, is that you can get a bit focused on problems, when actually looking for strengths and just finding out that your child can do something is incredibly important. That basically, once you find, you can hang an awful lot of positive news stories around a few achievements. And so you want your child to be achieving. And it doesn't really matter what they're achieving at. It can be absolutely anything. But once you start telling them they're brilliant at that, you can suddenly find that other things start improving too.
And the world is changing. I mean, that's the bigger point, isn't it? I remember a talk at Eton where they were saying, actually, it's not the academic stuff they study that's going to be their future. It's going to be the extracurricular. It's going to be finding that passion. And, you know, we're living in a world now where more and more people are entrepreneurs. It's no longer get the great grades and then go and do the corporate job. The world's changing, and computers will be doing the analytical bit. It's the creative, divergent thinking that I think is the bit we should be encouraging.
So now we're going to, as a last question, I was going to head off the territory a little bit. Outside of your personal expertise, I think probably lots of wise things you'll have to say. How do you manage your stress as a parent? How do we stop ourselves from just amplifying the problem?
There's a really I'm taking off my psychologist, putting on my sort of therapeutic or hypnotherapeutic hat on, and with the inner child work that I've done with a lot of my hypnotherapy clients, I'm reminded of the fact that a lot of the things that show up as problems for us in our adult life are just triggered by stresses or anxieties that we had due to incidents that happened as children. When I find myself getting stressed as a parent, or when I find my children getting stressed by a situation that's triggering for me, I pause and think, why does this seem so much more stressful than it should be? Why is this triggering something in me? What bell is this ringing in some little distant shut-off corner of my mind? Just by pausing and bringing that little bit of metacognitive attention to it, thinking about my thinking, that can sometimes take the heat out. And I'm a great believer, and my daughter taught me this, of finger breathing, which is great. The breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 slow breaths, just to allow your system to calm down a little, so that you can come at things from a more objective angle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And that's obviously looking at it from the mindset perspective. And what we often find is that there are certain traits, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So from a biological perspective, for example, we might detect something called pyrrole disorder that makes you incredibly prone to anxiety, Jekyll and Hyde mood swings, outbursts. That tends to be a hereditary sort of SNP, a genetic mutation that often the parent will have as well. So we often end up working with the parents as well because there's an underlying kind of theme that we found.
On a sort of similar but more anecdotal note, for early part of my career, I was senior teacher and head of English in a very academic London school, and every year I had to have conversations with parents about children who had been diagnosed as dyslexic, usually at age about 9 or 10. And the number of parents who wept when we had this conversation was quite extraordinary. And the ones who wept, well, the first question I'd ask them is, are you dyslexic? And the weeper would say, yes, I am. And it was like, oh my God, I've passed on this condition to my child and it's really terrible. And then you'd find out, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a consultant, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm a da-da-da. And you'd think, well, is it really so bad? It was like, what are you weeping about? It's like, your child's a bit like you, and your life's fine, and you're paying school fees, and da-da-da. So I think sometimes we just need to kind of like, we often desperately hope that our children don't have all the things that we're saddled with that have made our life a little bit more tricky than perhaps we imagine it might otherwise be. But you just kind of got to love yourself, I think, and love every aspect of yourself.
But you know what? There are benefits that go with that. There are benefits that go with the dyslexic mind. There are, ability to see connections that other people can't see. So there are always these positive elements. And I'm increasingly of the view there is no such thing as neurotypical. Hands up anyone who thinks they're neurotypical, because you know what? Meet my family. I just don't think it exists.
I agree, and I think we've all got a lot more tolerant, which is really great. So on that note, if this has made you think, I really do need to know more about my child because they've got the 11 plus coming up, you will be able to find the Key Clinic and Bonas MacFarlane. You're both sort of over there, aren't you?
Both in the corner.
Yeah,
over there,
over towards the coffee, so you can grab a coffee and then have a difficult conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time. Good luck with it all.
Yeah, good luck.